our meditation today is by
a whole different way of looking at the world. And if you're looking at the world as a cycle with rebirth, then it's not the same way as looking at it as, well, we put them in the ground and they rot away. Now, the underworld god's wife was named Mikte Kasiwalo. And her role was to strip the flesh off the bones of the dead and to watch over the bones. But she also presided over the annual Aztec Festival of the Dead. And although the modern Day of the Dead fiesta has an overlay of Catholicism to it, the Aztec Festival of Death is really its origin. The Aztecs believed that the deceased preferred to be celebrated and honored rather than mourned. So during Mecte Casihuatl's festival, they first honored the dead children, and then the next day, or in the next stage, they honored the adults. Now, in today's Day of the Dead celebration, yesterday was Dia de los Angelitos, the Day of the Little Angels, and today is the Day of the Dead, which is for adults, same as the Aztec festival. The original Aztec festival lasted for an entire month, from mid-July to mid-August. And in the Aztec calendar, this was the 9th month. And it was also the time of the corn harvest. Now, you might notice there's a symbolic connection between the Festival of Death, the number 9, the 9th world, and the death of the corn plant. All of these things are connected together. So, the Aztecs are going along, celebrating their Festival of Death. Things are moving along in their favor. They're at the height of their empire, and bingo, in 1519 the Spanish show up. A whole bunch of conquistadors, actually not a whole bunch, just a few, but they had a whole bunch of allies, who very rapidly conquered the Aztec Empire in about 2 years, two or 3 years. And everything changed, but like they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And shortly after the conquistadors got done with their rather bloody work, off the boat came the evangelizing friars to spread Christianity amongst the heathen. Well, after many centuries of evangelism, the church had learned a key lesson. If you can't beat them, join them. During Europe's Dark Ages, the evangelizing friars co-opted pagan festivals all the time and gave them an overlay of Christianity to make it easier to convert the heathen. For example, the European pagans used evergreen boughs to celebrate the winter solstice, which was an important pagan event. That was the origin of Christmas trees. So it should be no surprise that the friars who came to the New World did the same thing with the Aztec Festival of Death, and a lot of other festivals too, but that one in particular. They moved it from midsummer to November 1st and November 2nd, which are All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. Now, as you participate in today's Day of the Dead activities, and I strongly encourage you to do so, see if you can see the traces of the ancient Aztec Festival of Death as you look as you look through new eyes and see what you're seeing. Here are some examples. First off, most importantly, the Day of the Dead is not about mourning the deceased. It's about celebrating and honoring them. So this is a happy time. This is a joyful time. Skulls and skeletons are not viewed with horror, but they're used as decorations. Death is not separate from life, but they're halves of the duality. And you may see some people, or even see some masks, with half the face being a human face and the other half the face being a skull. This is an expression of that basic concept of duality. Or perhaps half the face is a human face and half the face is a jaguar. Death is not seen as an endpoint, but as another stage on a cosmic cycle which endlessly repeats itself. The Day of the Dead is a point on that annual cycle when we are visited by our dear departed. So in passing from life to death, we merely pass to another plane of existence, and the Day of the Dead is that point where they can return. And at this point of intersection, it is sometimes possible to communicate with your departed relatives, or at least you can pass the time with them as if they were on the other side of a glass wall. So the activities that happen on any given Day of the Dead vary from year to year. Sometimes there'll be a parade, and sometimes it'll be in one place or another, or dancers in the plaza or whatever. But there are two activities that virtually always happen. First is the activities that happen in the Pantheon. That's the cemetery down at the end of Ocampo. And I have to tell you a little story. The first year we were here, a few months after we arrived, we wanted to go and check out the Day of the Dead celebrations, and there was supposed to be something going on down at the Pantheon. And I'm a photographer, so I always like to stick my camera into everybody else's business, right? Well, my wife Carol is a little more sensitive than me, and she was concerned that we would be intruding upon, you know, the solemn experiences of people sitting around the grave sites and stuff. Well, I managed to persuade her to at least go down. We should take a look, see what was going on, and play it by ear. Well, when we got down there, what did we find? A huge tailgate party. I mean, there was food, there was dancing, there was liquor, there was a guy up on stage telling ghost stories in Spanish to the Mexican kids. I mean, it was a hoot. And that really transformed my idea about what this is all about. This is obviously, the Mexicans were not taking this in the same spirit we thought they might be. They were celebrating and honoring the dead. They were not mourning them. Now, at the Pantheon tonight, what you're likely to find, who here has been to the Pantheon in the evening? Stick up your hand. A lot of people have. And those of you that haven't, what you'll find when you go actually into the cemetery will be family groups sitting around, chatting and joking, laughing maybe. There'll be lots of food and drink, particularly beer and tequila. Likely there'll be several bands moving around from gravesite to gravesite for a fee, playing a couple of songs, and usually 2 or 3 bands playing at once, everyone a different song, naturally, this being Mexico, right? So it's really a lot of fun. And you'll also probably encounter people that say, come on over, you know, sit down, join us here, have a beer, have a glass of tequila. Be part of it. So don't hesitate to go and just take part in the celebration. The second feature of the Day of the Dead that virtually always happens are the altars to the dead. Now, anybody who's been up to the plaza has probably seen the altar that they set up in front of the cultural center. If you haven't, you should go up and see. And that's pretty much has a lot of the classic stuff that you'll find on the Day of the Dead altar. They're also today setting up altars along the street that's on the south side of the plaza, the one that leads from the church on down to the Pantheon. And they've got, when I was there, they had the marigolds, orange marigold petals as the base of each altar. They were just starting to set up the altars. Well, let's talk about the Day of the Dead altars, because as you're looking at the altars, it's helpful to know what you're looking at and why it's there. First off, the Day of the Dead altars, let's see, where's my... The shape of the Day of the Dead altars is like, generally, pretty much like this. And then often they'll do it by just getting 3 cardboard boxes of decreasing size and putting them on top of each other. Now this, by the way, is exactly the same size and the same shape as the ancient stepped pyramid that goes all the way back to 1500 BC with the Olmecs. It's the same stepped pyramid. The other thing that you'll see quite often will be on one of these steps, could be any one of them, or more than one. You'll find little sugar paste skulls, probably a row of them. Now those skulls recall the ancient skull racks that that were often at or near the temples, and they were known as zompantli. Anybody here been to Chichen Itza? Okay, did you see the zompantli there? No. Well, it's a long rectangular stone platform, and the sides of it are carved with rows and rows and rows of skulls. And the zompantli is where the Toltecs, the Aztecs, and the people of Chichen Itza placed the skulls of the sacrifice victims. Now the altars will also be decorated in colors. You'll quite often see a lot of purple, and that's sort of a nod to the Catholic tradition. But you will definitely see orange, and most particularly in the form of orange marigolds. And you probably have been seeing, if you've been looking around at all, walking around the streets, people carrying big bouquets of orange marigolds being sold in all the stores, everywhere. Well, in the Aztec language, Nahuatl, marigolds are called cempasúchil, and they symbolize death, as does the color orange. So what you're seeing is a very ancient expression there. And as I said, the base where the platforms are being set up here by the plaza, I just walked by it, or marigold petals, or some sort of orange substance. I wasn't able to determine exactly what it was. Might be the petals. Sometimes the creator of a modern altar will also create a path that leads to the altar, and they'll line the path with marigold petals, or perhaps orange sawdust, if that works better for them. And quite often what they'll do is that they'll have votive candles on both sides of the path, and maybe on the altar itself. In front of your altar, at the end of the marigold path, sometimes you'll see right on the path laid down with ash a cross. Well, that on the surface might say, well, this is the Christian cross. Well, maybe it is, but you should also know that to the ancient people, particularly the Aztecs, a cross had an entirely different meaning. The cross to them was the symbol of the sacred four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And north was the house of death. Now, there are various things that would be placed on or about the platforms, and one of those is pan de muerte. Anybody here ever eaten pan de muerte? Good stuff. It's a sweet bread made especially for the Day of the Dead, and is one of the foods that is placed on or about the altar. And it's made from flour and butter, sugar, eggs, yeast, anise, and orange peel. The bread is adorned with strips of dough, and on top of it is a little round piece of dough, and that symbolizes a tear. Now, another thing you'll find often is calabaza de tacha, calabaza en tacha. It's a food used on the altars, and it's a dessert prepared with sweet pumpkin, cinnamon, and the dark sugar cones that you see around sometimes that are called piloncillo. And I hope you notice that both the pan de muerte and the calabaza en tacha are made with pumpkins, orange pumpkins, and orange peels. Other elements commonly found on the altars include a photograph of the deceased, usually in a prominent place, sometimes on top, or maybe here. Some of the deceased's favorite objects, which might be a favorite drinking cup, a toy, a guitar, a saddle. It could be anything, anything at all. You'll find quite often a bowl of water and soap and a towel. And a bottle of the person's favorite beverage, such as their particular brand of tequila. And for the smokers, their favorite brands of cigarettes. Don't be a pack of them up there. And sometimes there'll be a dish of their favorite food. I've actually seen a table set with an entire table setting, complete meal, all of the person's favorite foods. Now, in thinking about the ways the altars are set up and the kind of objects placed on them, it's useful to remember the concept of the cyclical universe. On the Day of the Dead, the annual cycle of life and death has reached the point where the dead can return and sometimes even cross the barrier of death into this plane of existence. Therefore, to prepare for their return, if you're making an altar like this, what you do is you prepare as if you were preparing for the visit of a treasured relative who's been on a long journey or perhaps has moved far away, who's coming back for a visit. So what would you do? Well, they'll need to find their way back. So, you have your orange pathway, which leads to the altar. What might be helpful is you got the 4 points of the 4 cardinal directions. You got a little kind of a compass there. They'll want to know that they've arrived at the right place. There's going to be a lot of altars out there after all. So, they'll recognize themselves from the photograph. Hopefully it's a good shot, depending on how well you got along with this relative. Now, once they get there, they've been on a long journey. They need to clean up. So, they'll wash up with the water and the soap and the towel. They'll be hungry and thirsty. There'll be plenty of pan de muerte and calabaza de tacha, maybe their favorite food. They'll want to knock back a glass of their favorite tequila. And once they finish that, they'll want to light up with a good smoke. Just like you do with a relative returning. The other thing is that, as with the Aztec festival of death, your relative's return will be a joyful occasion. You're not going to mourn them, you're going to welcome them back. How you been? What's been happening? What you been doing? How are the gods? Next, I should say a word about Katrinas and where they come from and how they relate to the Day of the Dead. How many people here know what a Katrina is? Almost everybody. Few hands not up. For those who don't know, Katrina, a classic Katrina, is a skeleton figure, often of a woman, and usually dressed in a long, flowing 19th century gown with one of those huge flowered hats. You may recall now having seen these around. You can see them up at the plaza, around the kiosco in the middle. Often the front of the gown is cut low and exposes the bony chest of the skeleton. And although the Katrinas and the Day of the Dead are today closely associated with one another in the public's mind, there's really no historical connection between the two. They don't go back to the Aztecs or anything like that. The only real connection is the general Mexican fascination with death. It was only during the 20th century that you started to see lots and lots of Katrinas and have them start to be associated with the Days of the Dead. Well, these skeleton figures have been wildly popular in Mexico for more than 100 years. And the word Katrina doesn't come from Catherine, as I once thought. Katrina is the feminine form of the word Katrine. And a Katrine is a dude or a dandy or somebody who's a flashy dresser who kind of likes to put on airs and show off, right? And they were invented in the 19th century by a man called Jose Guadalupe Posada. And he got his start in Aguas Calientes, and they're very proud of him up there, by the way. They have a museum to him. And he was a political cartoonist, 19th century political cartoonist. And he loved to do political cartoons that lampooned the foibles of the wealthy and the powerful. And this was the era that he lived in of Porfirio Diaz. It was a 35-year period that led up to the 1910 revolution, and it's called the Porfiriato. And it was a time of tremendous wealth for a small elite and grinding poverty and repression for most other people. And many of the wealthy that were at the top had only recently acquired their riches, so they desperately wanted to be seen living the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Sound like anybody you know? And it was these people that Posada was lampooning. And he really did his work well, so well that he very quickly got run out of Aguas Calientes, had to flee. And he ended up going to Mexico City, where he went to work in a print shop and continued to do his work there. And during his career, he produced an amazing 20,000 engravings of various kinds of skeleton scenes and Katrinas. But not just the classic Katrina. Every scene in society that you could think about, he would do a skeleton scene. I mean, like a bunch of people in a cantina and two guys pulling out their knives and having a knife fight, right? With bottles in their hands, right? The whole establishment would be skeletons. There's actually two museums in Aguas Calientes. One is devoted strictly to him, and the other is the amazing National Museum of Death, which actually covers a lot of ground that I've covered here, and it has a pretty good selection of Posada's work, some of the original engravings. He's very influential not only politically, but two of Mexico's greatest muralists, Diego Rivera and Jose Clemente Orozco, both said that he was a major influence on their work. And if anybody's ever seen Diego Rivera's very famous mural of Sunday in Alameda Park, anybody familiar with that? A few heads are nodding. Well, right square in the middle, there's this big crowd scene of all these people. And right square in the middle is Katrina. And today all sorts of variations of Katrina figure exist. I'm sure you've seen them in the stores. They show people, Katrina's skeleton figures doing every imaginable thing, playing golf. I've seen bony dentists extracting teeth from the skulls of skeleton patients, right? Anything you can imagine, there's a Katrina. The pet dogs and cats as skeletons. Even right now over at the City Hall of Chapala, there's a figure on a horse, a skeleton horse and a skeleton figure, and it's actually of a person that used to live here, La Rusa, a ballerina that used to live in Ajijic, and she would ride around on her big black horse, and so this is devoted to her. As you wander about during today's Day of the Dead festivities, I hope you will recognize some of the things that I've been talking about, and that some of the things that you see will have more meaning to you. And that you'll understand why skeletons and altars to the dead are not mournful and gruesome to Mexicans, but are expressions of joy and good humor. Thank you.
I think it's on. If you have some questions, please raise your hand. Someone will bring you a mic and ask Jim, the expert on death.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Donna.
Good talk. I wanted to know with the families that build the altars, if they're celebrating a number of dead in their family, are there also multiple altars, or do they choose a person?
It depends on the family. Quite often, you'll find an altar with several pictures of deceased people on it. So yes, there could be sort of a group, celebrating the group, I guess.
The first word that you used in your drawing was Olmec. And I've seen very limited use of Olmec sort of statues or influence in Mexico, but much more so in Costa Rica. And my question to you is, was the Aztecs more of an indigenous species connected more to Mexico than Costa Rica, San Salvador, Guatemala? In other words, is the Day of the Dead a Mexican thing and has nothing to do with the rest of Central America?
Well, that's a good question. I think that you need to understand that the world previous to the Spanish didn't have the same boundary lines, and that Chiapas and Yucatan were part of the Maya world, which was centered in Central America, and north of there was more Nahua and Zapotec and whatever. I would say that the Aztecs drew upon traditions that originated with the Olmecs and even before. And where the Olmecs came from, I've seen information that they may have come from the west coast of Guatemala, so and ended up over on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. But the great Olmec civilizations really, La Venta and places like that, are along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. And the Olmecs, through trade networks and various other ways, spread their influence and their culture all over what we think of today as modern Mexico, at least the bottom 2/3 of it.
I want to congratulate you on your knowledge of Aztec culture. You didn't go for the folky aspects as their cult to death as a cruel act. You went to the heart of the subject, and this is not common. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. If I could just say something really quick about that. It would seem pretty horrifying to me to be taken up on an altar and have my heart cut out and be sacrificed. In a number of different contexts, it was considered to be a great honor. And there was actually a warrior, a great warrior from Tlaxcala, which was a hereditary enemy of the Aztecs, who was captured. And they, because he was such a great warrior, they offered to set him free rather than be sacrificed. But he refused the offer because he didn't want to miss the honor of being sacrificed. So it's a different way of looking at things. Yes, anybody else?
Yeah, Jim, I understand that Cortina has a poking fun at the wealthy, that group of people. Could you discuss that?
Yes, it was definitely, he perhaps struck the deepest chord with his portrayals of the heirs and put on by the nouveau riche of his era. But he also did a lot of scenes of ordinary people as skeletons and doing, in their ordinary foibles. Anything that you could think about, he had people doing it and they were skeletons. But the most famous ones are the Catrinas, of the women in the dresses and the big hats.
Hi, Jim. Over here. Oh, over here.
Oh, okay, got it.
I have a question about the level of the afterworld, the different levels. Was there a progression through the levels? Did one start like at the bottom of the first and then go up, or did it have to do with merit in life, or what was the meaning of the levels?
Where you ended up in the afterlife, which level, was connected with how you died rather than how you lived. So warriors who were killed in battle went to a particular level. Women who died in childbirth, interestingly enough, from the Aztec point of view, were equaled in honor of a warrior killed in battle. So they also went to a very good level. So it had nothing to do with whether you were a good person or a bad person. It's how you happen to die. People that drowned went to a particular level.
I just wanted to add a comment to the Katrinas that it's something a little bit similar to what you find in European churches a lot, the so-called dance macabre, the dance of the dead, where you have the skeleton dancing with people of all sorts of life. You know, they have the aristocrat and the rich lady, the mill, all the different kinds of professions and jobs and whatever. And I just wanted to point out the fact that this was inevitable to anybody. So I think that also comes out in Katrina's.
Well, that's a good point. In the period of the Porfiriato, European culture, particularly French culture, was very highly rated. And so it could very well be that Posada got some of his influence from some of the things you're talking about.
Over here. I was observing the pathways you described and the Katrinas, or the shrines there, and in Costa Rica it seemed to be a bit similar. There seemed to be what we would know up north as cedar boughs lining the... Do they have a significance, or did I get that wrong?
Are you speaking about what you saw here?
Yes.
I'm sure they do. I'm not sure precisely what the cedar bough significance is, but you know, you can trust that anything you see there has meaning. It's not there by accident. In fact, if there's somebody at the altar, you might ask them, what does this mean? People are very delighted to talk to you about their altars and explain who the person was and what the various objects were, why they were important to that person.
Yeah, this doesn't relate to the Day of the Dead, but I understand that after a following war, the Aztecs could have thousands of prisoners that would be sacrificed. The hearts were for the gods. Oh, I see. But the limbs, I understand, were distributed to the population to be used as food. And I was just wondering, there's probably some aspect of honor or the something that I don't quite understand.
Well, there's been quite a bit of dispute amongst archaeologists whether the ritual cannibalism that happened, they would sacrifice somebody and at the top of the pyramid, and then throw their body down the long steps to the plaza below, and then it was cut up and distributed in certain ways. And sometimes, if it was a particularly important person or a great warrior or whatever, as his body parts might be, distributed to the warrior societies who would have a ritual cannibalism to gain the power of that person. So there was like that. Some archaeologists have held that the reason why they did the cannibalism was a question of nutrition, that they weren't getting enough food, but that doesn't seem very likely to me, because the Aztecs had an extremely well-organized food system. Not only were they growing it in the chinampas, the floating gardens, some of which you can still see down near Mexico City, but they had tribute flowing in from all over their empire, so I don't think they needed that. But there was ritual cannibalism, and it was about symbolically assuming some of the qualities of the person that was being eaten. not a dish that I'm particularly interested in myself.
Hi, Jim. A question as far as contemporary altars. If a woman became a widow this year, last month, she would put up an altar this year. Would she put up an altar next year and continue? Or wouldn't that be a lot of altars if she had a lot of deaths in her family? In other words, do you do an altar once, or do you just keep doing them? Or is it a matter of your income?
Well, obviously what kind of an altar you can put together has something to do with how much disposable income you have, but one altar can be devoted to numerous people. It doesn't have to be just one. And remembering that the universe is cyclical. So next year, this person is going to come back and visit again, and the year after that, and the year after that. So of course you're going to have their picture up there, and anybody else who happens to pass along during that same time. Yes?
Hi. Okay, I'm Mexican, so I would like to say only that a lot of families, even if we are Mexican, we don't have this tradition. I have never had an altar in my house, in my mother's house. But I lived in San Miguel de Allende for 12 years. And then I saw how American people were so involved in it. And I feel a little ashamed about it. Like, oh my God, I'm not doing this, huh? and then there is another point. In these kind of towns, when you have a lot of tradition, because you Americans are contributing to make it bigger, like more special for people, then they show it a lot more. You go to a place like my birth city in San Luis Potosí, and you have these altars a little bit in downtown. But you go to the other places, you go to the, perhaps at school they have a lot, because now they are trying to influence the children to be more close to our costumes and not Halloween. But there was a time that we didn't recognize this as a so good tradition for Mexico. Thank you.
Yes, that's a real good point. In Mexico, there's been, for a very long time, a very ambivalent feeling about the ancient people. And on one hand, the greatness of the empires. On the other hand, sometimes the indigenous people have been looked down upon. So there's this dichotomy in how folks have dealt with it. And I think certainly following the revolution, there really was a comeback of people paying attention to indigenous cultures, encouraging indigenous cultures, the government saying we should set up special events and venues where this could happen. And so I think this is more of a 20th century, the altars I'm sure have been going on for a very long time, but they're being emphasized more as a way to reach back to those cultural roots, as you were saying, and to encourage the children to understand where it all came from.
I think that may be our last question for the day. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Jim.
You bet. Thank you, everybody, for being such a amazing audience.
So I know what you see for the rest of the day will have a lot more meaning to you, thanks to Jim's talk. Come back next week and find out what LPS is doing in its Mexican program. Please stack your chairs and dispose of your coffee cups correctly.